Welcome back to the Lensless Photography Podcast. I'm your host, Oliver Winegar, and this episode we will be talking with Andy again about why film sucks, but it doesn't. Let's roll some intro music. So first of all, film doesn't actually suck, for the most part. But this episode is to cover our love-hate relationship with film. First, we're going to quickly share our background experience using film. So let's start with Andy.
Oh man, as a middle-aged man, I started with film because that's really all there was. As probably in my early teens, my dad showed me how to use his Minolta camera that was fully manual, which I still own. And I learned how to shoot film with that. And I shot film, through my teenage years. I shot film on an LDS mission, like I spoke about in an earlier podcast. I shot film through college. It wasn't really until after that I got into digital photography at all, but I still shoot film, and there's good reasons or justifications for it. But so as far as history or background with film, it starts early and continues today. What about you, Oliver?
So again, like I mentioned in earlier podcast episodes, what I started with was I had my Minolta that was from my dad that he used on his mission. And I started with that camera because I had a film photography class my sophomore year of high school. So that's actually kind of how I learned photography. I had my Canon T3 before that, but I really learned on that Minolta camera. Later in high school, I got into medium format. I bought a Bronica, which I still have, and I use it here and there. And right before my mission, my dad gave me, well, it actually wasn't my dad. It was my grandpa, I guess you could say, for Christmas gave me a 4x5 large format Cinar, which my grandpa was dead before I was born, but that was the whole gift present, as it said, from grandpa. Really is from my dad because he still had his large format camera, well, from my uncle. I quickly started getting into the bigger formats of film, 4x5 and medium format. And I still do a decent amount. I mainly shoot digital, but I still do both of those. But for me, is always kind of a cool connection with my grandpa, who was a professional photographer, that I could use his gear and, still make amazing pictures now in 2021, almost 2022, all these years later. That's pretty much my background. I'll shoot film for fun now, but not for any real jobs though. But probably about 20% film, 80% digital, I would say.
Yeah, I'm probably...
Depends on the month. Some months I will be 80, 90% film and then 10% digital and vice versa. It usually comes in phases.
Sure. Yeah, I still shoot film a little bit. I have shot a wedding with film entirely.
That scares me. I don't know.
It scared me too. It really kind of put me to the test on making sure that I felt my skill set and relied upon my skill set in order to create the images that the bride wanted.
So what prompted you to shoot this wedding on film?
She actually contacted me because she had heard through someone else that I shot film and wanted her wedding done with film.
Wow.
It was a very Western style wedding in a barn. That whole thing.
I'm sure that was
everyone with cowboy
awesome
boots.
doing low light with film.
And it was absolutely intimidating and difficult to do. There was a little bit of digital work. I did record the ceremony, with the digital camera, record the video of the ceremony, but I did shoot all of the still work with film. We did a lot of the pictures pre and post ceremony outside of the barn so that I had daylight to utilize
Yeah.
with that film. And she was very happy with the results, and I was relieved.
That's awesome. I didn't ever know that you did that. That would be scary, but I'm sure did you get really good results out of it?
I think so. Yeah. I can picture in my head 3 different shots that just came out really cool and were really what she was looking for, a certain aesthetic and just something about it being on film and maybe the permanence of it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whatever her appeal was, because everyone's got their own different thing, but it's what she wanted. And I was able to create that for her, and it worked out well.
Yeah, that's awesome. What I also wanted to ask you is, what film gear do you currently have right now? I know you buy a bunch and then sell a bunch, and so I know it's never the same.
I do. I definitely go through phases with film gear. Currently, all of my film cameras utilize 35 millimeter film. I don't have any medium or large format cameras, although I am
Anymore.
kind of on the hunt for a Hasselblad. But
Andy, by the way,
passively,
a few months ago sold his your Mamiya,
yeah,
your 120, and he gave me like 6 rolls of film, so I'm forever in debt to him.
It's not that expensive.
Well,
but you can certainly buy me dinner. That'd be fine.
Chuck a ram, all you can eat. Okay. Sorry. So what 35 millimeters do you have right now?
I have my dad's old Minolta. I still have my Olympus OMG that I bought in England. I have a Nikon FG. I have Canon AE1, Canon A1. I have some
Your Elon.
Canon Elons. I was doing some film comparisons, and I ended up where I owned 4 EOS Elon 2 cameras and 4 of the 50 millimeter f1.8 lenses to go with it. I got them all mounted onto a crossbar that mounts to my tripod and carry that thing around. That was a beast.
We need to make a video on that for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And then I have an EOS 3, which I really like a lot. It's a really neat, capable film camera. One of the things that I like about the 3 and the Elons is that because they're part of the EOS system, I can mount my new EF mount L series lenses to them.
Bet you sold most of them.
I did, but
you still have a few.
But some of them I sold to my brother, so I can still get my hands on them if needs be.
And you can always rent them at Allen's if you need to.
And that's true. That's the gear that I have at the moment. Like Oliver said, I have a tendency to buy and sell as I change my preferences and that sort of thing. I do intend, like I say, I'm waiting for someone to trade in their Hasselblad, and I will buy one of those and own it, if nothing else, just so that I own a Hasselblad. But
yeah, exactly.
But definitely because
they are really nice.
They're phenomenal pieces of equipment. The resolution of the lenses, even lenses that are 50 years old, are just absolutely phenomenal. And that's what appeals to me about it, where 2 years ago I wouldn't have cared at all and passed on several different opportunities. I had to buy one because they didn't have a meter. But as I learn and grow and find other ways to meter what I'm doing, that resolution of that glass really appeals to me. As someone who's addicted to Canon's L series lenses, a nice Hasselblad lens fits into that category very nicely.
Yeah, for sure. So my gear that I have, like what I said, I have a Minolta XGA that I use very rarely. I have a Nikon F2, and then for medium format, I have my Bronica ETRSI, which is my first 120 that I bought, and I still have it, but I have a few lenses for it. That's actually a really good camera. It's not, the lenses aren't the sharpest, but it's pretty cheap, or at least it was cheap. It's a lot more expensive now. But I actually remember when I had my Canon T3 and then my T6S, I ended up mainly using that Bronica because the images just came out better. They were sharper and they looked better than my Rebels could. And mainly just because I had cheap glass that I was using on my Rebels, but still for several reasons. And then I have, what's that plastic medium format camera? A Holga.
Oh, yes.
Which is kind of like a disposable 120 camera, which is actually, it's a pretty cool camera, but it's very nichey. You get weird light leaks and kind of vignetted photos, but it's kind of fun to mess around with here and there.
For sure.
And then I have another foldable 120 camera that's kind of like a speed graphics, but it was made to be a 2x3 camera, but there's a 120 back on it. And I've never really got that thing to work very well, and it's kind of a big pain to use. And then for my 4x5s, I have a Cinar P and a Cinar F, which were both from my grandpa, and those are just insane. I think if I shoot those right, I for sure can get better resolution than my Sony A7R4. But it's shooting it right and spending the time to do it.
Sure.
And the money, which is kind of why this episode 3 is called Why Film Sucks, but it doesn't, is because I'll get in these little film sprees where I'll love shooting film, and it will just be like so much fun, and I'll be shooting my 4x5 and spending a bunch of money on the film and to get it developed. And like for color film, it's like $10 a sheet just for the film itself, and then a few extra bucks to get it developed, and then you have to get scanned. And the results are amazing, don't get me wrong, but not that much better than my digital for most of the stuff that I do, which is just on my phone or computer is how I view it. And so that's kind of the thing of why I say film sucks, is because I'll get in these little film sprees, whether it's 4x5 or 120 or 35 millimeter, and it's so much fun shooting. That's the thing with film. It's way more fun than shooting digital. There's just something about the process of not being able to see your images and slowing down that really makes you think. But then you get your images back and you're like, oh, especially if it's 35 millimeter, you're like, oh, that's grainier than I remember 35 being. And that's Definitely not that sharp. And that's when it comes down to, you really need to buy sharp gear and expensive, nice lenses for film. But it's like, why would I spend that on film when I don't make any money off of film?
Sure.
So what do you think are the benefits of film? Why do people still shoot film when these digital cameras like we have are amazing?
So this last year and a half, there has been a huge influx or increase in the number of people shooting film. And
please actually spend a minute and talk about that before we get into anything else, about how much film is coming into just Allen's, just the store that you're at.
So the store that I'm at processes about 250 to 300 rolls of film every week. The Orem store that's 40 minutes south, they handle all of the black and white, and they also have 3 people that work basically full-time dealing with film. They process nearly 700 rolls of film every week. We are buying as a company the same quantities of film as we were in the 80s, which is absolutely crazy.
Unbelievable.
But, that kind of numbers in processing film is really crazy, given that for a long time, film has been out of fashion and overrun by the capabilities of digital cameras.
So why are so many people shooting film right now then?
One, because it's trendy. There's
a trendy Instagram thing.
Definitely. There have been some popular celebrity types that
shooting on disposables and stuff like that.
And I saw some popular actress or the like that had a Contax camera. There was a picture of her taken with holding this camera, and that camera, which is a decent point and shoot film camera, the value of that camera went from $170 to $1,000 overnight.
That's insane.
Is the camera worth $170? Absolutely. Is it worth $1,000? No, but
now it is.
But you sell it for that because someone will buy it for that because some celebrity had one. And so I really think that there's a certain amount of just trendy that goes along with it. But there's also some cool things that film can do that is difficult or maybe even impossible to replicate with digital. There's certain colors that come out of film that's different and unique. Certainly when film comes out looking grainy, that's very different than when your digital photos come out looking grainy, because it's not grain, it's noise, and I don't want to get into that, but it's absolutely a different look.
Yeah, I think for sure.
It's a different style.
I totally agree with that. It just has a different feel to it. And I think if you really want to, you can probably get that on digital, but it's easier just to get that straight out from film.
Sure. Well, and camera companies like Fuji, they've been making film for, I don't know, 100 years or whatever. Their cameras have film emulators built into them. You can tell the camera that you want your pictures to look like they would look if you were shooting Pro 400H that's been discontinued, or Superia or Velvia or whatever. And Fuji is very good at making their digital camera create images that look like their film.
Yeah. What I don't love about that, though, is it's a JPEG, though. And the nice thing about film is most people just scan it and you just get a JPEG out of it. But really, film has a ton of resolution to it, even 35 millimeters. So you can do a high resolution scan and get a raw equivalent, a TIFF file out of it, and you can even edit it afterwards. And so that's the nice thing, is you can still pretty much get like a raw file out of your film cameras, and you still have all those awesome colors already in it.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually, in preparation for this episode, I was reading about, the resolution of 35 millimeter film. And really, what I found was that it's kind of all over the place. There was one person talking about how it's basically 10 megapixels, but then someone else saying that you can scan it as high as 87 megapixels and still get additional information all the way up to that point.
Yeah. And it probably depends on your lens.
Absolutely.
And the film stock, because you can shoot a 400 or an 800 that's not going to be great, but then there's some of those, Velvia 50 or my favorite film, Ektar 100, where they're really sharp and you get quite a bit of information.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if the grain of 800 ISO film is, 8 times the size of 100 ISO film, then you have 1/8 the resolution out of that film effectively. And so it definitely can change depending on what film you're using. I also am a huge fan of Kodak's Ektar 100. I think it's the prettiest color that anyone is doing.
It's wonderful. And I showed you that one picture that I took on my Minolta XGA. I think with a 50 millimeter lens, maybe a 28 millimeter lens. I can't remember, but it was on Ektachrome 64T. And this was probably a 20 or 30-year-old expired film that I had. That was my grandpa's. That was just a roll I had in the fridge. So the colors were garbage. It was just straight blue. But the detail was amazing. It was a forest scene up in the mountains at the ski resort with the snow in it. And if you go to my Instagram page, you can see it's a blue shot. And it was actually way more blue. And I desaturated it a little bit because it was insanely blue. But it was just amazing how sharp and clean this was, especially being an expired film. But because it was a a slide film and a super low ISO film.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think are some other benefits that come from film?
For me, again, not like what I said, I don't know if last episode, that's really how I think everyone should learn is on film. Everyone should buy their SLR, it doesn't matter if it's a cheap one, get a 50 millimeter f2 or f1.8 and a roll of black and white ISO 400 film, and that's how every single person should learn photography. Is how I'm convinced, because it teaches you so much. First of all, you're slowing down. I can tell my photography would have been way different if I wouldn't have learned like I did on film, because I take my time, and because I learned that from film. Like film, you have to take your time, and you set up your shot, you make sure everything is right, and then you take your shot, because you're never getting that shot back. Whereas digital, it doesn't really matter. You can just erase the shot if you want. And you can shoot black and white, which really you're paying attention not so much to colors, but about the lighting. And so you can learn just a ton from that about the lighting, the shading, and everything. And so film just makes you take your time. It makes you put a lot more thought into it. And so I think that is super beneficial to a photographer, and especially a new photographer.
Definitely. We've talked before about how I teach photography, and typically I will teach, if someone's brand new, I will teach them an introduction to photography with aperture and shutter speed and the like on a digital camera, because it allows you to see the results right away so that you understand what it is that your camera is doing. But very often at some point, those people get to a spot where they feel like they're not improving on anything. And my solution to that is to hand them a film camera and a roll of film, and give them instructions. And the instructions are, take this camera and not your digital camera, go somewhere, drive 45 minutes away, shoot this roll of film, and then turn around and drive back. No digital cameras, no cell phone pictures, none of it. And then drop off your film, and it's going to take, a week or whatever to get your film back. And what I have found 100% of the time is that those people, even halfway through a roll of film, realize what they were maybe doing wrong or not paying attention to when they were shooting digitally, that they're forced to pay attention to, without fail. They'll take a picture and then lift their camera up to look at the back of it, expecting to see an image on a screen. And I think we all get that way. I know I definitely do, when I go a month or two before I shoot a roll of film again, and I'm going to do the same thing and take a picture, and I look at the back of my camera and go, oh yeah, there is not a screen on this. I don't get to know. And there is that factor of no second chances. You just drove 45 minutes and took 36 pictures, and that's all you get. You get 36 pictures out of a roll of film, sometimes 24. But you're going to travel, you're going to shoot that many pictures, and you're going to turn around and drive home, and then you're going to wait for a week. And it really puts into perspective what you're doing in camera.
Yeah.
And forcing you to slow down and take your time and pay attention to what you're doing in the camera. And not only does that help you, improve your photography skills in camera, but it also helps reduce the amount of time that you're spending in Photoshop and the like, trying to fix the things that you didn't do right.
Yeah.
I had a girl that was she shoots weddings. She's a great photographer, but she said, I don't know how to stop shooting like crazy. She was taking 10,000 photos.
That's ridiculous.
Of a wedding. It's like 6 hours, 10,000 photos. It's just, she says, I can't even get through all of these. I will just ignore whole sections of them because I just don't have time to go through all of these photos. And I said, okay, here's what we do. We're going to set up a photo shoot. And because she wasn't ready and I wasn't interested in pushing her into shooting a wedding with film, but we set up a photo shoot so that she could go out and just shoot film. And now she shoots weddings and takes 1,000 photos or less and still has the same number of final images that are phenomenal images. She may or may not have gotten better as a photographer, but it helped her focus her attention on what she was doing in camera. And then instead of using the spray and pray method, she was intentionally creating images with her digital camera now at weddings. And it's made a huge difference for her.
Yeah.
To not have to go through 10,000 images. I can't even imagine
that. Yeah, that's insane. And that's because of film. When I shoot my digital, I don't take that many pictures. It's not that hard sorting out for my pictures because it's not that many I take. It's very, very limited because of the habits that I learned from film.
I'm the same way. I went out and did a little mini photo shoot downtown today and shot several different scenes and different things. And I'm looking at my camera now. I took 55 pictures total.
Which a lot of people would have way more.
2 rolls of film.
Yeah. Unless you're shooting medium format, then it's 10 to 15
definitely
a film, or 4x5, which you get a front and a back, so 2 shots per
piece.
Yeah, per piece, which you can have more, but it's expensive. And that's with film too, is it's 35 millimeters cheaper, so you don't feel as bad. But if you're shooting medium format or large format, it's every time you take a shot, you're losing money. So you need to be conservative, and you need to be wise in your shots.
For sure. Well, and even with 35 millimeter film, a roll of film is about $10.
Yeah, and if you're shooting slide film, that's a different story too.
Yeah, even more expensive. But you're going to spend $10 on a roll of film. You're going to spend $10 processing and digitizing it, and 10 or $11 or sometimes more, depends on your local lab. That ends up being 70 cents a shot.
Yeah.
Even with 35 millimeter film, which is the least expensive option.
Yeah, and that adds up for sure. So let's cover some of the disadvantages of film now. Why film sucks?
Well, I guess the first thing is that it's expensive. It's a continued expense. I can spend a lot of money on a digital camera, but once I have the camera and the battery and the memory card, it's not 70 cents a shot anymore. They're essentially free.
Again, I love shooting film, and again, especially large format, but it's too expensive.
Sure. Yeah, definitely expense. I think there's more risk with film. Very often, working at the store, I see people bring in a roll of film and we process it and the whole thing is blank.
And we've all had several of those, I'm sure.
Definitely. And what's difficult is that you don't know, if your camera's malfunctioning, if your shutter's not actually moving, you hear the mirror move, but the shutter doesn't move and you can't tell. And you do a whole shoot with film and there's nothing.
Yeah.
And it's a gut-wrenching feeling.
It is. It's
not entirely different from a memory card being corrupted.
Yeah, which I feel like is more and more rare these days.
Definitely.
But it's the worst feeling, because it's like you remember taking these shots and being so excited. Oh, this is a great shot that I took or whatever, and then it's gone. So funny story, working at Allen's is, I don't know how many times this has happened, but countless times. A customer comes in and they go to you with their film camera in their hands, and their film back is open, exposing their film, and they're like, something went wrong with the film. And I try to look at it. Am I still going to get anything to the shots? And I look at them and I say, well, not anymore, you aren't. Or they'll have it closed and they'll bring it to you and they're like, yeah, something's wrong with the film. And then they'll pop the back open. And I'm like, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, well, I'm trying to show you what's wrong. I'm like, well, you just ruined all your shots.
Yeah. Yeah, this
happens at least when I work there, a few times a week at least.
It still does. And it's hard because I think people don't understand maybe it's the science behind film that they're not understanding, that you don't get to look at the film. It has to go through a chemical
It's not an
process.
just a
It's not an SD card
yeah.
that you can pull it up and look at it and delete it. You get one chance to expose it right, and then it has to be processed before you even get, the negative copy of that
Yeah.
film, which is another thing that potentially sucks with film, is that you have to wait.
Yeah.
There are sometimes you can get it right away, and certainly options with that. My store is so backed up with film. We're 7 or 8 or 10 days.
Which really isn't that bad, but a few years ago it was that day or next
Yeah.
day.
Yeah, 2 years ago, if you came in the morning, we had your stuff done later that afternoon.
Yeah, and there's regular customers that would come in and be like, "Hey, can I wait for the film?" And we'd be like, "Yeah, sure, not a big deal."
Yeah,
But
definitely.
now
Now there's too much of it to try and get through, and we're limited on equipment because they really don't make
no, they
the
don't.
equipment anymore that does that. And so the aging equipment that we have is constantly needing maintenance and repair, and that backs us up a little further.
Yeah,
And every once in a while you'll find somebody selling one, and and we'll jump on it and spend thousands of dollars to get one of those pieces of equipment, because when you know how to use those, it's absolutely invaluable in order to serve our customers and provide that stuff. But it's getting to be more and more rare and more difficult to find the right equipment
yeah,
to do that,
yeah,
which makes the wait longer. And then
and slowly the price more expensive too.
yeah, yeah, definitely, as the cost of chemicals, because there's the chemicals that we have to buy to put in the developing machine to develop your film, they cost money, and the price of those is constantly going up. And then the
Film prices too.
and then the waste chemical from that has to be it has to be processed, and you got to pay for that. So there's costs that continue to climb, unfortunately, with that stuff. I was hoping that the cost of that stuff would go down, and that supplies of film would, production would ramp up with this current craze of film, but it doesn't seem to be happening the
Yeah.
way that I want it to.
I think another hard thing with film is just getting consistent results. And that's probably my biggest gripe is, if you're good enough with film and if you know your camera enough, yes, you can get consistent results. But again, like we've talked about, is things always happen where there's a light leak accidentally, you're something camera, these cameras are old, 50-year-old plus cameras that the foam or something is worn out and you get a light leak or something like that and it ruins some of your film. And so that was always my least favorite thing about film, and getting scratches on the film or spots or whatever, and having to scan your film and then go into Photoshop and clean up all your film and spend a ton of time on that. And digital, maybe you have a little, at worst you have a little spot in your sensor and that's just one click cleanup, but it doesn't take forever like film does.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and like you say, you're dealing with 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old cameras now, and the meters in those have a tendency to fail eventually.
Yeah.
And when your meter is starting to fail, it's not as big a deal as when your meter is really failing, and it takes 10 or 12 rolls of film to realize what's going on with your meter. And then you either have to find a different way to meter, or get a different camera that has a currently working meter.
What is nice now, because I've had that problem with meters not being exact, actually I've had it quite a bit, but is they have just apps that aren't perfect, but they're pretty darn good, actually, from my experience. I'm trying to, let me check and see what the one I have is, but they're pretty spot on for the most part,
and very consistent. I use one called My Light Meter. It's
for Apple,
it's
assume.
a paid app. Yeah, it's on the Apple platform. It's, I want to say $4, which is
cheap.
pretty reasonable considering what you can do. But you set your set your ISO and you point it at whatever and take a picture, and it gives you your comparisons for aperture and shutter speed. And like I say, I've had very consistent results from that.
The one I have is for Android. I'm not sure if it's on Apple or not, but it's Light Meter free, and I think they have a paid version of it. I'm not sure what the difference is, but you have a camera meter, you have a sensor meter, a reciprocity calculator, you can save exposures, you have a white balance, a depth of field calculator, and so there's a ton of stuff on this. You have a gray card, and so it's pretty good, and especially for a free app.
Yeah, that sounds pretty amazing.
So Andy, what's the difference between 35 millimeter 120 and large format? Why don't we explain this for people that may or may not know?
The main difference between those different categories is the size of the piece of film that's being exposed to the light. You could relate it to the size of the sensor.
Yeah.
35 millimeter film is the same size as a full frame digital camera, is what they're really referring to with full frame, is that it's the same size as what you would normally expose, onto a roll of 35 millimeter film. And they come in canisters that most everyone has certainly seen at one point or another. 120 millimeter film, I'm honestly not sure why it's referred to as 120 millimeter, because it's 60 millimeters wide. And then large format is like 4x5 or 8x10 or measured in inches. And with that, you're exposing light to a huge area of film. You've got a gigantic sensor. And there's certainly advantages that come from that. Having a giant sensor with all of that information on there gives you, a giant realm of possibilities to go with it. But
yeah,
like we said before, the price
it's expensive.
Goes up exponentially with that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, and don't quote me on this, but I think 4x5 they like measured it out, and I think it was like equivalent to like 450 megapixels, or it could be more or a little less. I'm not positive, but it was a crazy number like that. So if you get a really good scan of it, you have tons of resolution.
Yeah, definitely.
The cool thing about medium format, which actually medium format's probably it's the sweet range. You have a bigger film negative, and it's not crazy expensive. It's more expensive, but it's not 4x5 expensive. But you're still getting good resolution, and it's more portable than a large format camera is. But the cool thing is there's tons of these cameras that are going up in price. So if you're going to get one now. But you can get a square format, you can get a 6x9 format, a 645 format. So you can get all these different, sizes of your frame on the same film type.
Yeah, for sure. And like the 645 that Oliver was talking about is a very popular size. Mamiya makes and I think Pentax too makes a camera called a 645.
Yeah.
And it's referring to 6 centimeters by 4.5 centimeters is how big the sensor is, which is effectively 4 times the size of a 35 millimeter negative. And so if you figure that kind of resolution on 35, imagine the resolution that you have with that 645. In addition to that, there's cameras that use that same film that are a 6x9 format,
which is double the size.
Which is double the size of that. You're talking about 8 full frame sensor captures,
which you only get how many shots out of a roll?
You get 7 or 8
is right around there, which is not very many at all, but you get a beautiful shot out of it.
Definitely. And
but if you mess up a shot, it's
or you mess up a roll.
Yes.
You're only messing up 7 shots.
Yeah,
but
so
you're
maybe
still
it's not
talking
as
about
bad.
you're still talking about a roll of film that costs $10 or $11 or $12 and processing that costs $10 or $11 or $12 or more. And
so at least
and
$20.
now you're talking $20 to $25 for 7 or 8 shots in that case. And then the factor of expense comes into play. That being said, with the right camera, with the right glass, the world of possibilities that comes with even just a 6x9 format, let alone something like an 8x10 camera, which is what Ansel Adams photographed with. I mean, everybody's heard of that guy, and he's created some pretty amazing stuff that's really popular. His camera of choice was an 8-inch by 10-inch negative. And, just the world of possibilities that comes from that
Yeah.
are absolutely insane. But he would also spend a year
On a single image.
on a single image so that he could find the right time of year when the angle of the sun is hitting his subject, be it Big Sur or Half Dome or whatever. He wanted that light to be correct, and he would spend a year evaluating what was the right day and time of year in order to take that shot. And then if it was raining, then he'd just wait till the next year.
Yeah. And talk about a master of Photoshop. Ansel Adams is the one. Photoshop didn't
Absolutely.
existed, but first of all, that is a very common misconception that film is raw. A lot of maybe amateur photographers, that's how it was, but any professional photographer spent hours and hours in the dark room manipulating their photos, just as we do in Photoshop.
Definitely.
Maybe
I did film
they're not, stretching out mountain peaks and stuff like that some people are doing now, but
for sure. But there were certain, I remember watching a video about a particular shot of an old town that Ansel Adams had taken, and it showed the original image that's on the negative.
The one in New Mexico, I think, with the moon.
But then also his final results, and there was stuff that was missing from that, and from that original image, from that shot. I shot film in college, and there were manipulations that we would do, mostly dodging and burning.
Teaching us split tone and
stuff. When you're talking about college level stuff, that we were doing with 35 millimeter film, because this spot was too light or this spot was too dark, and you'd have to go in and fix that, and
without seeing your image.
Really. Yeah, without being able to see what exactly it is that you're doing. And you're cutting out circles of paper with a stick on the end so that you can stop light from hitting a certain spot for a certain amount of your time, and and then you got to run that paper through the developer. And
tell me how that feels, running that paper through the developer.
Oh man. It depends. Because
if it's a good shot,
if it's a great shot, the coolest thing in the world is dropping a piece of paper in there. And of course, we were all working with black and white, and so you could have a red light on, and so you could see what you were doing. But the coolest thing in the world is watching that image just appear in that piece of paper.
Just magic
from the developer, and it absolutely,
straight from Harry Potter.
It is absolutely magical. And I know that there's science and all that jazz, but it is absolutely magical to see that image just appear, and then to go through the fixer and the wash and all that sort of stuff, and be able to hold that picture up and go, nailed it, is really satisfying. And in a lot of ways, more satisfying than it is on the computer. I was messing with an image that I took of a homeless man today, and I really like the results, and I'm still working on it, and I really like it, but there isn't that magical moment of that picture appearing.
No. Well, and this is the thing too, is you took the shot, you saw it on your camera, you saw it right when you transferred it to your computer, and you saw it through the whole process. And with film, you take your shot, and then you don't see it until you get your negative. And then, especially if you're not scanning it, then you hold your negative up to light, and you're like, okay, that looks like a good shot.
I think that's it.
Yeah. And then you can do a little test sheet so you can see it tiny, and you're like, okay, we're gonna enlarge that bad boy. But when you enlarge it, it's just, again, it's magic, especially the first time doing it ever. It's mind blowing, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. There's some, there's absolutely some beauty and satisfaction that comes from, being in that environment, in that dark room, where the only thing that you can do is work that image and create that image from the film that you created elsewhere ago. You have that image appear there in front of you, and that really, I don't know if that can be replaced
No.
with digital at
No,
all.
it for sure cannot. Well, I have all the supplies from my grandpa to set up a darkroom, so I don't know where we'll do it, but it would be pretty awesome to do it if we could. I have a large format and larger. Not that we would do that.
Really?
We would probably stick with a medium format to 35, but that would be pretty awesome though.
Because I've got some space in my backyard where I'm thinking about building a shed.
A darkroom shed.
Maybe we build a darkroom shed.
That would be pretty awesome.
I'm going to end up with 9 sheds in my backyard for all the different stuff I want to do.
Yeah. Well,
I need a studio. I need a darkroom now. I need a place for my Legos.
That will be the biggest of the sheds. That's my dad told me. He's like, hey, do you want me to keep all your Star Wars Legos, or what do you want with them? I'm like, well, you can't get rid of them, that's for sure.
No, okay. I've had to, yeah.
On to photography, sorry. So my all-time favorite photographer, Vitali, are you familiar with his work?
I have heard of Vitali.
He's actually come into Allen's a couple times, but I think he lives up in Park City, or he used to have a studio up there, but he's my all-time favorite photographer, and he does the most insane large format work. But he shoots on a large format camera, and the all color and the negative size is giant. It's like 30 by 40. So there's a picture of him on top of his big truck, and he just has this giant camera, that he's shooting with, and it's pretty amazing. And he does all darkroom work, and so his prints sell for $60,000, but they're just incredible. And there's something about the colors and everything out of it, but it's truly special. I encourage everyone to search him up, Vitali. So on that note, can you realistically be a professional photographer and only use film? There are cases like Vitali, who sells these prints and stuff like that, but be a professional photographer that does commercial stuff or portraits or whatever. Can you actually do that and only use film?
The easy answer is yes. There are a couple of guys that I know that strictly shoot film. As far as the work that they do and sell, I think that they have basic digital cameras that they use for light comparison and such, but the work that they do and the work that they sell is strictly from their film that they use. So yeah, absolutely, you can do that. It doesn't have to be on the extreme either. You can be like Vitali, that creates these super cool things with crazy giant negatives, and that's great, but you don't have to be in that realm of stuff in order to shoot professionally as a film photographer. As film exclusively, you can shoot 35 millimeter professionally. People did it for a long time.
I think that's why sometimes I like to say that film sucks, is because the film stuff that we're getting is not the top of the line. I do have top of the line 4x5 stuff, but my 35 and my medium format stuff is not top of the line. And so I think that's where the misconception kind of also happens, is we're used to shooting more budget friendly stuff. And if we were to shoot Hasselblads and Leicas, we would probably be saying differently. There's still the pains about film that we covered. Those will always be there.
Sure.
But the quality will for sure be a lot better though.
Yeah, definitely. Like I mentioned before, I have those Canon EOS film cameras, and I can put my L series glass on those cameras and get professional results from the professional film because I'm using professional gear. But you can't always get those same type of results when you're shooting a basic manual film camera with the kit lens, quite frankly, the 51.8 or the 51.7 or 9 that came with that camera originally 50 years ago. That was the kit lens, and it was certainly capable of wide aperture more than kit lenses are now, but I don't think that it's at the same level that it would need to be, or that you need to be, in order to be able to work professionally with film or shoot film exclusively.
Yeah. Geez, well, this is making me want to start shooting more film now.
Yeah,
Do you need to buy another medium format now, or
no.
are you going for large format now?
No, I'm kind of waiting for somebody to bring in a Hasselblad that they don't want anymore.
That's a good idea.
And I'll pick one of those up, and I'll pay too much money for it because they're expensive at the moment because they're popular. But it's one that I will likely keep forever. Whereas other ones that I've had and it's fine, but I've sold because I didn't really use it or like packing it around, that sort of thing. And I will use it occasionally. But aside from that, I enjoy shooting 35 millimeter film. I'll probably grab one of my cameras and throw a roll in it. And, all this talking about it has certainly got me hyped to throw a roll.
Yeah, film for sure is fun.
So as far as film goes, film sucks or it doesn't. But if you have an opportunity to pick up a film camera, shoot a few rolls, and just see what it's like, you could certainly benefit yourself with the skills that are learned from that experience. And maybe you absolutely hate it and you never touch film again. And maybe you love it and you shoot with film all the time. Give it a shot. See what you think.
Yeah. Either way, you'll learn from it. I think, again, like what I said earlier, I think every photographer should at least try film. You'll be able to learn a lot from it.
Yeah. Rent a camera, if nothing else.
Yeah. And a 35 millimeter you can get for pretty cheap. But if you don't like 35 millimeter for the quality, try medium format because you will see a big jump.
Definitely.
Okay. Well, that is it for episode 3 of the Lens Dust Photography podcast. Thank you for everyone for listening. Like always, if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to us, and we will see you next episode.
All right. Good night.